gonna pause it. Go ahead.
All right, good evening, folks. We're going to call to order the regular meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District Board on March 21st. Can I get a roll call?
I'm sorry, pardon me for a minute. This mouse. Sorry about that. Director Larry Russell.
Here.
Director Matt Sampson.
Here.
Director Jed Smith.
Here.
Vice President Ranjiv Kush.
Here.
And President Monty Schmidt.
Here. Okay, can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Can we, any public comments on the agenda?
Not on the agenda.
Okay. Can I get-
Public comments, but this is public. You're asking for public comments on the adoption of the agenda. That's separate.
Yes. All good? Okay, roll call vote.
Director Russell.
Yes.
Director Sampson.
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
Director Kush.
Aye.
And President Schmidt.
Aye. Okay, comments from the GM or board members?
I have one. The Operations Committee met on Friday, March 10th, 2023. Staff provided an update on the Pine Mountain Tunnel tank replacement project, and the board reviewed and referred the second amendment to the contract with project to tonight's board. To view the Operations Committee, materials, and watch a recording of the March 10th meeting, visit marinwater.org/calendar. That's all I got.
Thanks, Larry. Any other board members?
Yeah, thank you, Monty. I just wanted to note, we've been speaking quite a bit about alternative funding opportunities, noticing the opportunities that are also coming through with both federal and state financing for water infrastructure projects. Yet I believe it was at the Operations Committee meeting, Alex Amaya gave an update on some of our infrastructure development and spoke about the WIFIA program from US EPA. And I just wanted to note that WIFIA has recently made loans totaling $115 million to the Santa Clara Valley Water District for flood resilience and seismic resilience of a reservoir. And they're estimating that the district will save about $47 million by financing these projects with WIFIA loans. And they're planning to commit an additional $580 million to support a $1.2 billion Anderson Dam retrofit project. In addition, I noted that the California Department of Water Resources, DWR, has awarded $15 million in grants through its Integrated Regional Water Management Program to support water supply projects in the San Joaquin Valley. So just to highlight that these there's a lot of this activity going on, and I'm sure we're doing a good job of staying on top of it through staff monitoring, but wanted to flag it.
Yep. Thank you, President Schmidt. Last Thursday, the 16th, we had a watershed committee meeting held at 1:30 here. We got 3 presentations from that meeting with Sean Horn as the lead. The first was for the One Tam Forest Health Strategy with Johnny Franco from One Tam, which was appreciated his attendance. And then we got an update on the BIFIT plan from Sean as well as Carl Sanders. And then finally, we had an update on the Watershed Recreation Management Plan, where we're at with that. On the 17th following day, myself, along with our board president, attended the Lagunitas Technical Advisory Committee meeting. And we got some very interesting presentations on some projects that are going on throughout Northern California in terms of watershed areas, specifically around fish habitats. So very much appreciated that, and look forward to that group getting back in public.
Thank you. I realize I jumped over actually public comments and items not on the agenda. So maybe we'll do that and then we'll come back to general manager announcements.
Yes, we have a couple of speakers here. First speaker is Mr. Roger Roberts and then Mr. Phil Sauter.
I don't know whether you're keeping up to date with
Oh,
the Wall Street Journal, but there's an article today in the Wall Street Journal, which I think you may find interesting. It's a conservation program opportunity and that's lawn painting. It seems that this is a thriving industry in a number of places across the country. And I thought you'd be interested. Do your neighbors paint their lawns in green increasingly? And it's not just in Phoenix. I suppose it's possible to actually do a painting on your lawn, but apparently most people are painting them green. And the only problem is if they use actual paint, when you walk on it, it crunches rather, it's not so, it has a sound effect as well. But there are also opportunities for using dyes, and it may be something that we could do in Marin. When people have dead lawns and they'd rather have them green, they can paint them.
Thank you for the creative suggestion.
Mr. Phil Sauter, please. And then after Mr. Sauter, I have two speakers on Zoom, Clayton Smith and Marriott Shin. Go ahead, Mr. Sauter.
Thanks. I'm Phil Sauter from Woodacre, where the power is out again. And I'm continuing to get helpful information from the usage data provided by Carrie and Paul a couple months ago. There's a slide in one of the earlier water supply presentations that shows 40% of our single family residential water use goes for outdoor irrigation. That would be about 4 million gallons a day. We also have dedicated irrigation customers who use a little over 1 million gallons a day. So out of the 18 million gallons a day of water sales, we know that 5 million gallons of high quality drinking water are being used for purposes where non-potable water would be fine. What we don't know is where this water is being used and by which customers. If you add up tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 water sales, plus all of the dedicated irrigation sales, you'll get 3 million gallons a day. So that's about 60% of the 5 million gallons of our estimated outdoor water use. I'll let that sink in for a minute because it means that we may be selling a couple million gallons of outdoor water every day at tier 1 prices. Hopefully that will change with our new tier structures for the upcoming rate increase. The info provided by Carrie and Paul also shows that we sent out about 60,000 bi-monthly bills last year to these tier 2, 3, and 4 customers and dedicated irrigation customers. That means about 10,000 customers are in the non-tier 1 category and are probably using significant amounts of high quality potable water for non-potable uses. And that means these customers are using an average, as I calculate, of about 500 gallons per day of treated potable water where it does not need to be used. And I'll stop there as I'm starting to veer into agenda item number 6.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Clayton Smith.
Yes. This is in light of the incredible amount of rain that we've had. Looking on your website, I noticed that we are now at 50% above the average rainfall in our county. And we still have 3 months yet to go. Actually, a little more than 3 months yet to go. And this kind of follows up, and we're at 100% of storage in the reservoirs. And recently I got a email from a congressman who I support from the foothills, who came back to from Washington, and he was up at the Folsom Dam outside of Sacramento, up on the American River, and posting a video of the discharge from that reservoir that's flowing out to sea. At least that's the implication. And he indicated, and I looked up online, that this discharge rate up there is 16,000 cubic feet per second, which is a great deal of water. And so I'm looking here, I went back through the stats on your reservoir during this excess rain that we're having. And I noticed that over, I think, the last 17, almost 3 weeks, we have been at over 100% with our reservoirs, which indicates we must be discharging a great deal of water from our reservoirs into the creeks that are adjacent to them. But there's no message, there's no indication or of that on your website, what the discharge rate is right now from our reservoirs, which I think would be extremely helpful in making decisions about the efficacy of raising our dams, particularly in light of what that fellow was just talking about. I think from District 3, the funding that's now low interest funding that's available to do these kind of improvements, this kind of construction on the reservoir system. So I would like to know if someone would have that information concerning what the discharge rate is. I would imagine the boss next to the lady who rang the bell might actually have that number on hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mariette Shin.
Yes, hi, this is Mariette Shin, GIS specialist at Marin Municipal Water District. Thank you, board members, very much for being here in this very difficult weather. I hope you all have safe drives back home. I wanted to just thank you for all your hard work and for supporting the district staff. And thank you for being aware of our resource needs and taking action towards improving the health of our work environment and our operations. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the union members who I saw in the audience, sitting in the audience there with you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
General Manager's announcements.
Wanted to share with the board kind of an issue that has gone from some storm damage to a higher level of concern. In January, we were notified by Marin County Open Space of a landslide on a fire road within the Loma Alto Preserve near Fairfax. The location is Old White Hill grade at the intersection of Old Railroad grade, Fire Road, and the Gunsight Fire Road, if you happen to be familiar with that. On this road, we have a 27-inch welded steel transmission line running down the road, which is the main transmission line leaving San Geronimo, of course, our main treatment plant, before connecting with the Fairfax transmission line, just a key piece of our infrastructure. In January, when the slide first occurred, we went out immediately and did land surveying, and there was no risk to our pipeline. It was well inboard of the slide area. A bit more background is Open Space is a lead agency. They have responsibility for submitted the slide for possible reimbursement, and they'd be the owner. We've coordinated with them to collaborate on the geotech evaluation and design of the retaining wall to ensure that our transmission line is protected and that the work won't impact the line itself. Brings us to yesterday, where we were notified that the slide has worsened and is fracturing further inboard of the road, getting closer to our transmission line. So currently, they've gone out there and reapplied and really reinforced the tarping to protect it during the storm. And we're coordinating with them. So we've offered, and they've accepted, that we're going to proceed with an expedited design with Miller Pacific, with a contractor, and continue, both of us, to monitor this. So at this point, it seems under control, but we're going to be on top of this going forward until it's repaired.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you to all of our staff and our partners as well that are out there in these storms, because as many of us who traveled here, we passed flooded roads and I've seen an incredible number of slides in the past couple of weeks, and I know that our watershed is not immune to that. So appreciate all the work that's being done to make sure that our watershed and our infrastructure remains safe. Okay, moving on to the consent calendar. Can I get a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second,
Carrie, a roll call?
I can take the roll call now, but we do have a public comment on one of the consent items, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Mr. Phil Sauter, that's on the consent calendar, sir.
So sorry.
No. Okay. All right. I apologize then. Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
Vice President Kush
aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to our regular calendar, and item number 9 is the first thing up, resolution for grant funding for the federal Water Smart program. Is that you, Matt?
Good evening, board members. Matt Segas, the district's grant and legislative coordinator. As part of the district's efforts to support projects identified in the strategic water supply roadmap, the district has submitted a proposal for a desalination feasibility study to the United States Bureau of Reclamation's Water Smart program. In the last several years, federal funding programs have offered support for development of desalination projects that will supplement existing freshwater supplies in the Western United States. Under the terms of this grant solicitation, the district has requested $200,000, which is roughly 50% of the total capital cost of the project, to study feasibility of a brackish water desalination facility in Petaluma. The district received letters of support from the city of Petaluma and the North Marin Water District for this project. However, this program also requires an authorizing board resolution for application. Upon approval, the final grant resolution will be submitted to the United States Bureau of Reclamation. Thank you.
Thank you. Board questions, comments?
Matt, thank you. That's really interesting and glad to see the opportunity. Can you tell us a little bit about the objectives for the study, feasibility study? What will be
Yeah.
evaluated?
Maybe I'll jump in on that. The idea of this study and why we're hopeful we're going to get the grant. Well, the second piece is we think we're well positioned for grant funding for the study and then maybe further funding WARD to move forward, because it is an innovative project in that it's right. It's not salt water. It's far more expensive, less energy. So it's I think will be looked at favorably. What we plan to do in this initial phase is an initial kind of desktop look at what's out there, opportunities, the type of soil, and then move into a pilot we expect, which would be a fairly small well, to then look at modeling in terms of what capacity we may be able to get out from this area, particularly given that it's a lot of silt, and that's pretty difficult. It can be for a groundwater well, because right, the water doesn't really move and you can blind up your screens and that kind of stuff. So anyway, we need to look at that. And then the other area, yield, and understand potential yield. The other area is brine discharge, and understand that. So that's the study would look at both of those areas, potentially with a pilot if it moves forward, to really understand feasibility. And then if it's feasible, the concept is, and you heard, we got 2 letters of support from Petaluma and North Marin, work as a coalition, as a group, as a regional benefit project. But we'll also be bringing it to Sonoma and the other contractors to assess their interests. Just in the timing so far, we hit the 2 local agencies that appear interested. So this, again, as we had talked about, this is really kind of a newer concept that hasn't been looked at in terms of feasibility. And both of these issues, in terms of yield and brine discharge, have a fair amount of uncertainty at this point associated with it.
I'd just like to say thank you for the effort for this, because where we're at with the Jacob study now, based on the recommendations, this is the kind of work we need to do. And if we can get someone else to help us contribute to that, it allows us to spend our money in other ways, exploring other options. So thank you for your effort.
Board comments?
What do you think the likelihood is?
I think it's a good likelihood, given that the state and federal government are really offering a lot of money for desalination feasibility and subsequent studies.
How much?
Well, there's continuing solicitations that are coming out, so it's in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars being offered.
No, I understand that part. I'm asking for this. How much might we get?
How much would we get?
Could we get?
We've requested $200,000.
So that should be chump change for them.
Be a start.
And our contribution is?
So we're under the terms of the program, we're providing a match of $200,000 and then also some staff time. So it's
And is there any reason why we're jumping forward with a feasibility study on desalination when we have so many other things on our roadmap that may or may not be of higher importance, like recycling or AMI or there's quite a few opportunities for grants, and I know you're all over it. Why is this one the first one that we're getting?
It's a good question. Our approach to grants is apply to everyone grant opportunity that we have unless there's a reason not to. So this just happens to be an opportunity. It's specifically a desal grant. So the only opportunity for this specific grant, and the timing is now, is to put this project in. And as you know, of course, this project was included in the roadmap that the board selected to move forward.
Well, we selected it with the idea that we were going to get a lot more information about milestones and timing and when to push forward with other feasibilities. So this one seems like it's jumping forward. So is what you're saying that something is happening right now that we have to decide this ahead of all the other feasibility studies?
Well, the decision would be to pass on this grant opportunity.
What's the date timeline that we have to get it in?
well, so this one, the window opened in early January and it closed on February 28th. So we did have to hit that window.
Right. And is this the first we're hearing about it now?
Yeah.
So I got the notice to approve this at 1 this afternoon. I was lucky enough to have time to have read the packet. It was on, I know it was on the agenda, but we didn't get our presentation until a few hours ago. And I know 2 of the 5 board members had to drive 2 hours to get here today. So I find it hard that we can approve something with just a few hours notice when we knew about this months ago. It's confusing to me. Why didn't we know about this earlier?
I'm not exactly following the question. My understanding is the interests of the board and the direction is pursue all grant opportunities that fit within the context of the work we have in front of us. And the board did select the roadmap that includes this item. And we've been planning in parallel to pursue studies on desal, on conveyance and increasing winter water from Sonoma and local storage, and work on all those in parallel. And that's our plan going forward. So this is simply, I guess, looked at it as an opportunity to support that effort.
Yeah, and I think what I thought I was approving in the last meeting was to get the milestones and the fees and the timeline for when we were going to make these investments in these studies. And so we just got those a couple of hours ago, and I have a bunch of questions on it. So it feels like we're just moving forward with all of them at once right now. Is that right? Yeah. All right. I don't know that I'm comfortable having not seen this until a few hours ago. And I know at least 2 of the 5 board members definitely haven't looked at it. I mean, another way to say it is like, there was huge pushback from our community about a $700,000 Jacob study, right? I mean, I think people are like, oh my God, we're doing another study. And now this is 200 for just this one piece. And our board hasn't fully reviewed it. So it feels like we're kind of under the gun, approve it now or not. It's like, it probably makes sense, but haven't we had, I feel like we've had a lot of pushback from our community about study after study that we just approve. And this one we haven't even actually reviewed. And it's been on the desk for 3 months or 2 months.
But I might be wrong. I'm not trying to be a pain, but am I
No,
hearing
no,
this wrong?
I'm just
Maybe other
trying-
board members can
I'm
chime in and
just
I'll step back.
trying To follow, because we're pursuing grants and we're implementing the roadmap, both in direction. We do have an item coming up that is going to be talking about the implementation of the roadmap broadly. But what we're, full speed ahead, and that's my understanding pretty clearly of the direction of the board, understanding that certainly we want to be bringing to the board scopes and details and schedules. But that doesn't always dovetail with the timing of a grant opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, maybe I could jump in. Jed, I certainly, I appreciate your perspective on the suddenness of this. And I also, I agree with the comment that, following one study with another study can seem, a little bit, I don't know, it seems like spinning our wheels to some degree, to the public at least. But on the other hand, I think we have to recognize that we've all learned that none of the items that are on the roadmap are going to move forward without additional studies, that these are needed. And so,
Yeah, no, I'm not questioning whether we need another study. I'm just questioning approving $200,000 expense without knowing or having reviewed it. We haven't had any time to review exactly what we're approving. And we have to decide right now, and at least 2 of the 5 members have not read the packet.
Is it, at this point, we wouldn't be obligated to the $200,000. This would be a grant application. And if the grant application, if it was successful, we could still, at that point in time, turn down that grant and not have any obligation. Is
Yeah,
that
if we
correct?
were to receive it, we would bring it back to the award for we'd bring it back to the board for acceptance of award.
Okay.
And that would be, is it September, the timeframe?
Yeah, late summer or even fall.
I think, given that, and I like the idea of us pursuing grant opportunities, $200,000. If this is something that we decide to pursue, it's a great opportunity to cut the cost in half or something like that. And I think that's the kind of pursuit of funding that we're excited about. And we've talked about already earlier today. I think that as a matter of timing, it would be helpful if maybe we could try to put the cart and the horse in the right order. And maybe at our finance and administration committee meeting, if we have funding proposals that are coming up, we can try to preview them a month in advance. So just so there's a little bit more time for board members to look at things and be prepared.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other board comments?
I think it's just a good recognition that none of this is going to move quickly, so that occasionally we do have to jump on opportunities, recognizing that it's going to be half a year before we have the opportunity, whether we know it's going to come through. So if we don't move quickly on these things, sometimes we're going to miss opportunities that set us back by potentially years. So I think that's important to recognize, in addition to having the transparency and clarity that you're asking for, Monty.
Any other board comments?
I hear a different question from Jed than I think is being answered. I think his comment is fair in that, I've pushed for a long time to get this stuff to the board members at least a week ahead of time so that you don't get into this issue. But this one is I would say it's more of a habit that's causing the issue here than it is a real problem. All your comments are correct. It's an opportunity. We need to move forward. I think it's important. It's actually 300,000, right? Not 200,000, because we have to put 50% up with it. Yeah,
It's the award requested is $200,000.
right. But then we have 50% match, right?
Yeah, a $200,000 match from the district.
200,000.
Yeah,
Okay, so we're actually 400,000,
total project cost.
which,
yes.
which is fine with me. You've heard my story about measure twice, cut once, over and over, and you'll hear it over and over. But I think the issue is a different one. And as I say, I think Jed is right on with this in that, this stuff needs to flow out sooner. I mean, obviously you've been thinking about this for a while. maybe we can get some kind of a monthly summary or something of grant opportunities, just to kind of highlight that part. I think that would help see the future. I can see a role at finance, but I can also see a role at the dock. So it just depends on which way it goes. But I think give it some thought, okay? Because that's the question I hear. It's a different question. It's not so much about the grant, at least that I hear. It's about the policy or the practice of how we're getting stuff to the board. That's a whole different question, and I think a very fair question. So keep that in mind. It's not so much for you.
No, thank you. That is exactly my point.
Yeah.
Right. How do we get the information necessary to make appropriate decisions? Right. And in a timely manner.
Yeah.
So that we can all be thoughtful about it. Not the fact that we have to move fast. I know we have to move fast. I know we have to make decisions. No, this is an important opportunity. We have to jump on it. But it sounds like we've known about this for a while. And I think that's important.
Any other board comments? Okay, so this is an approval item, and so let's move forward with the vote. Oh, sorry, public comments
Yeah.
on this agenda item.
Thank you. We have several. First is Mr. Roger Roberts, then Clayton Smith and Paul Duder. Go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
I'm not on this item, I'm on a different item.
Okay. All right, let's go to Mr. Clayton Smith. Let me unmute you, please. Just give me a minute or a second. Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, I have to say that the optics on this are really bad, given the aversion that this county has shown towards desalinization. And to have this kind of pop up after the deadline, I guess is February 28th. And where two of the board members only get notice of it while they're on their way to the meeting. You know, it just falls into the category of government by stealth, which unfortunately, not just Marin County, but California in general seems to be falling into this kind of like bureaucratic cloud, and no one really knows what you guys are all doing. And so I think particularly, I know that I'm going to be talking about this with people in the environmental community, probably in a meeting later this week or next week, who were part of the campaign to axe the desal drive several years ago. And this is going to come up. And it's if you were planning to do this in a way to avoid political controversy, this was, I think, not exactly the right way to do it. And I think that particularly, as I said, given the previous aversion to desalinization, not to mention the toilet to tap ideas on the board here. And in light of the incredible amount of water we're getting now, and the question of how much is just flowing back out to sea wasted, this whole thing is very problematic. And I think if you're interested in going forward with it, the community deserves some notification. I mean, some real notification, not just a week or a couple of weeks, even a month. We need a couple of months of notification so that everyone gets notified on the bill that they receive, so that we can, as a community, respond to what you're doing. And I know the general manager was not here during the campaign against the desal, but if he was, I think he'd appreciate my concerns on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Paul Duder, then Mimi Willard. Go ahead, Mr. Duder.
Hi. I just wanted to speak up in support of Jed Smith. I think that this expenditure seems to be a little bit rushed with very little information about exactly what it is. That's my first comment. The second comment is, my understanding is that according to Measure S, MMWD cannot spend money on desalination expenses. And I'm wondering if this would count against that or not. I personally think that desalination is something that should be considered. But I think that the Marin voters have expressed interest, expressed their opinion on this, and that we should perhaps float a new measure to settle that question, whether or not Marin is actually interested in desalination going forward. Have a vote on that. Let, as the previous speaker mentioned, let the people that are against it voice their opinion. Have the people that are in favor of it voice their opinion. Have a vote. And then once we decided that we are in favor of desalination, then it makes sense to kind of go forward with these kinds of projects. That's just what I wanted to suggest. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Duder. And
Terry,
Ms.
before we go forward, can we take a second, and I'd like to ask Molly to weigh in on this. I think it's an important question that would benefit from some clarity about what we can do.
Sure, I'd be happy to, President Schmidt. As far as the initiative that was adopted and is on the books, there is a voter opportunity that's required prior to the district financing construction or constructing a desalination facility. This is simply applying for a grant to do a feasibility study, so much earlier in the process. So it does not run afoul of what the voter initiative that was adopted says at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Mimi Willard, please.
Yes, I have two comments. Number one, just echoing what Molly just explained. At the time that there was the fight over the desal, there were two competing ballot initiatives, and the one that prevailed is as Molly described, and the one that failed prohibited doing any spending money on any studies. But what I wanted to comment on was the general issue of what information is distributed to the board and also to the public in advance of the board meetings. And MMWD is not unique in this respect, but could become unique in a positive way if the board and staff were to decide collectively that you would choose to make available all relevant information in advance of the meeting at the 72-hour mark when public notice is usually sent out. And under the Brown Act, which was passed prior to the existence of PowerPoint, all that information that the board and the public would need are required to be in a staff report. But because PowerPoint didn't exist, it's now a loophole, and it's common practice for whatever reasons for agencies in this county to wait until very shortly before meetings before distributing them. And this is really unfortunate. And I would love to see MMWD step up and basically adopt a policy in which they commit to making that material available in advance at the 72-hour mark. And I think if staff understands that that's the expectation, they will perhaps start earlier on preparing those materials. And there could be special circumstances where it comes in later, but I think it would be good going forward, and it would prevent the kind of thing that we have going on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Willard. I have no further speakers.
Okay, thank you. With that, let's have a vote.
What was the motion and who seconded?
Oh, right, sorry. I need a motion.
A motion to adopt the resolution.
Yes,
I make the motion.
second.
You seconded,
Second.
President. Thank you, President Schmidt. Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
I abstain.
Vice President Kush,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that moves us on to agenda item number 10, the water supply roadmap update. This is an informational item.
Good evening, directors. Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director. Let's see. Oh, I found something. So where's the Zoom? There's the Zoom. Share.
The first test, Paul.
I know, it's very exciting. I'm sure you can tell we're bated breath here. It's very strange for me though, because my eyesight is just at that point where I can't see the screen if I put my glasses on, but you all look like you're smiling to me.
We are.
Right. So anyway, good evening. So we do have a quick water supply update and then we'll take a look and delve into the roadmap update. So tonight we'll cover some water supply conditions and I think we can all guess what that might look like. Have a peek at our forecast in terms of reservoir storages going out to 2024 and then get into the roadmap. So our cumulative precipitation here, this is, we had I think somebody earlier saying we were 150% or something of normal, but we're just around 60, probably a couple more inches than this. This was as of last week. Our average is 52 inches a year in a rain year. And so we're 65, something like that inches. So really, really nice rain, but it's not quite 150.
Although that vertical part of the curve is interesting.
That is pretty vertical.
Noah, get the arc, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see here, the dashed line for the average. So we are definitely doing better than an average year precipitation wise. In terms of reservoir storage, it's following that trend. We're fuller than full. The height over the spillways is increasing, with every rainfall event that we have. And yeah, I think Ben lost another bet last week when he said the rain was done. And I look now, next week, we have 3 days of rain, about another inch forecasted to come in. So
Do you have an idea of how many CFS are going over the spillways?
I don't over the spillways right now, but I just looked at the gauge at Samuel P. Taylor. It's 500 CFS, which is a chunk of water. A CFS is 7.5 gallons per second going down the stream. So
Put things in perspective, the flow of the Sacramento River at peak is 100,000 CFS.
yeah. And a couple of days ago in the big storm event, Samuel P. was at 2,000. So it's not a huge amount for a river, but it is by our sort of tank storage stuff. It's a big number in terms of water. And this slide, let's look at Lake Sonoma storage, since that's one of our key partners. You can see they're well into the flood control pool. I did a little math for us in the bottom here in the blue call out box. They're about 127% of storage, average storage. Average storage for this time of year is about 220,000 acre feet in Lake Sonoma. We're well above that. And this concept, just briefly, of being above the water supply pool into the flood pool, this is sort of the concept of FERO. There are federal rules over how they operate these reservoirs, and they've got to release water if they're above that supply pool at certain times of the year. And the FERO that you may recall Grant Davis talked about at our retreat, and this allows them an exception to these operating rules to allow to keep water in that flood control pool for water supply purposes. In terms of how we're doing and how much water we've taken into our system from Sonoma this year, we're at about 2,900 acre feet of water, and we have a fiscal take or pay minimum of 5,300. Obviously, during reservoir spill events like we've been having for most of this year so far, we try to reduce the water that we take from Sonoma. It just wouldn't make sense if water is going over the edge. We try to use our local water when it's spilling. What this means, of course, is that we'll have to pick up the pace at some point here to be able to hit our 5,300 acre feet take or pay. And I was chatting with our director of operations, and he's got a plan in place to start increasing those flows. Probably not till till sometime in April. So far this year, again, we had another caller earlier ask.
Doesn't really make sense to increase those flows until it stops spilling.
Well, ideally, I agree. But
I mean,
we take
whether
or pay, so.
Yeah, I know we pay or take, but if we don't take, we still pay, but it just costs more per acre foot. Huh?
Yeah, I guess traditionally there are some rules in the contract that are complicated, so we want to try to make sure we hit that 5,300 if we can.
That I agree with. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think we shouldn't jump the gun here because, we don't really know where we're going. I mean, this is good sign, but
Yeah.
this could all change like that and we go flat.
I know we're getting into detail here, but do we need to start taking it in April in order to be able to take the full 5,300?
I don't know. Yes, is the short answer. We'll be taking a fair bit of water, around 8.5 million gallons a day, starting sometime in April. I'm not sure the exact time. And that'll allow us to achieve the 5,300
Within the contract period?
within the contract
Okay.
period. Yeah, that's the idea. We did have, and it's an interesting topic about purchasing from Sonoma, and we'll get back to that in another slide or two, because I do want to have that discussion this evening.
Just
And-
because we're on a creative topic here, it does also beg the question, if we had greater capacity, we could wait until later in the year to be able to take that 5,300. I think, if we, by the summer, we will not have any more rainfall, we'll assume, and we will start consuming our
Right.
stored water. And if we had more capacity to be able to take later, but anything we take in April, if we're still spilling, it's just, I'm not sure why we would take it unless there's a savings in energy or something for not moving it. But anyway, the point being, maybe the bottlenecking capacity to move water down
Right.
is part of what's being highlighted by this challenge.
The other notable thing, right, 60,000 acre feet so far that we spilled, and that number's going up, right? If we had greater volume, that would be captured water as well. Yeah, portion of that.
Of course, if we had a pipeline to Sulhuli, it would take care of that. So, there's a lot of ways to
Right.
skin the cat.
Right.
Just be aware that East Bay Mud lost $30 million worth of water out of San Leandro Reservoir. They had moved in 30,000 acre feet and went over the spillway.
Right.
So, we aren't the only ones in this boat. And the key thing, what you said, Monty, what you said is true, but you have to be prepared to see the water go out over the spillway. You put it in the reservoir, it keeps raining, it goes right out. So, it's not exactly like a savings account. It helps, but you have no way of keeping it. So, that's the tricky part of this.
Yeah. It's not exact, to be sure. So as we look forward to next year, there's some reservoir projections here. The black line denotes our historical levels in the reservoirs, total storage. And so you can see that we're full here over March of 2023. And the dashed lines, the green dashed line represents if we had our average runoff year, right? You'd see we'd be spilling again next year pretty early on. And that would assume, right, it's a good water year, it's raining, we'd try to hit just our 5,300 from Sonoma again. So these storage lines, they reflect how much water we're taking from Sonoma as well. The purple line just below it is 75% of average runoff. And both of those actually correlate reasonably well with rainfall. We don't put rainfall on here because how it falls, in other words, in big batches, you get lots of runoff, whereas if it's sort of spread out over the course of a long period of time, you don't get quite as much runoff. So the same amount of rain in any given year, how much runoff you get kind of depends how it falls. So we use runoff here. Again, 75% average runoff is a good year for us. We're only thinking about purchasing the minimum take-or-pay from Sonoma. The green line that emerges down below there, that's a 50%. And you'll see now in that 50% average runoff situation, we do hit our first trigger of the recently adopted water shortage contingency plan. And even though we would be trying to take sort of our maximum amount, if you like, of 9,000 or so acre feet from Sonoma. Now, we may be able to get more from Sonoma, but maybe there's some constraints there. So we've taken a little bit of a conservative approach to how much water we'd be taking from Sonoma in this particular storage level curve. The dashed line below that just assumes if we were only able to get 5,300, what impact on storage levels that would have. So all in all, I think we're in a strong position, as you said, Director Russell, going forward, but we don't know exactly what's going to transpire for us. So that brings me to the roadmap update. And without my glasses, you're all still smiling, so that's a good thing. We told you at the retreat, this was our tentative schedule for the roadmap based on selection in February, which the board did at the end of February at the special meeting. The board selected the integrated roadmap strategy. And so we have been trying to hit this schedule. We brought our first consultant on board this week, actually, to help us affect the scopes for some of the bigger, more complicated projects so that we can get those RFPs out on the street and rolling.
Who's that?
It was Woodard. It's just a sort of a short-term contract kind of focused around scope. And there may be some opportunities for us to amend that to do other things later on, but.
Are they allowed to bid on the work that they scope?
They're probably not going to bid on that work. Yeah.
I don't think it's a very good idea.
Yeah. So we're looking to Director Smith, to your comments around, I want to know, how is this schedule going to play out? What are you guys actually going to be doing with these funds? And it may be some time before we can really satisfy your desire to get that kind of business plan developed, that layout of exactly what's going to happen. But we have some preliminary information to get into later on tonight. So, and again, this is all information. It's not approvals, all of these pieces and contracts. In fact, many pieces per, say, Marin Sonoma, or per even, local storage, those are going to come back to the board as individual pieces for you to look at, comment on, and then approve or give us other direction. I think we remember kind of the elements of the strategy. This is the same slide. There's a couple buttons, a couple of bullets added here that I want to draw to your attention to under the water conservation. You'll note that we've added AMI in, which reflects the board's wishes with respect to the funding requirements that Brett took us all through and the rate plan. And of course, water loss. This was, as you may recall, out of the Maddow study, they recommended us conducting a water loss study. So we have that scope of work in draft form. We'll be moving forward with that. In terms of AMI, you mentioned that there's lots of opportunities for grant funding and so on, I think, and that's true. We've applied for a US EPA earmark for AMI for about $1 million for our disadvantaged communities to get AMI installed. So fingers crossed, if we find out later this year, that could mean another 2,000 or so AMI units being installed in our disadvantaged communities. So we're not standing pat and just waiting to the end of the 4-year period. We're going to try to scramble and find whatever ways we can of moving that project forward as quickly as we can. So I won't read all of these. I think you're familiar with these bullets from our work on the roadmap. Looking at it another way, those colors really did wash out, didn't they? You'll have to trust me. Those are the short-term actions are in the green that you can't see. It looks like it's white background. So electrifying Sulahuli, Phoenix, Bontempi connection, forecasting and stream release automation, the water loss study, and the subject we were just touching on earlier, the optimizing the strategy for taking water from Sonoma through the existing infrastructure. So this is just a pictorial look at it. And again, I draw your attention to the AMI bar down at the bottom there. And that's just a rough approximation of when we think the whole, SAP transition and then AMI installations will start taking place.
Paul, if I could,
Yeah.
just a little more on AMI. Based on board comments, next month we are bringing an item to discuss and explore the timing of AMI, different potential approaches to do it, what acceleration would look like, what the benefits and costs would be. So that will be discussed next month.
Can you explain that row, the AMI row goes from, it looks like 2029 to 2045? Is that implementation of it? It's going to take 20 years?
No,
16 years.
right at the beginning of the bullet is
Yep.
it's deployed.
So it's going to take another 6 years to deploy it?
I think that'll be part of the
Oops, part of
discussion
the
that
discussion.
Ben just brought up, but
But why does it go out 16 years, that one
it's just as the same as all of them. They're showing just contributing that water supply.
during that period of time?
Yeah, across that.
Same
whole
with
planning period.
conservation would be all the way across
Right,
and
right.
others.
Yeah, that you can't see. It's supposed to be green.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
One more quick question on the AMI piece. Is the information next week or next month, excuse me, going to include approximate water savings or water conservation that contributes to this with a rough number or estimate?
So in the strategic water supply assessment, AMI is already factored into the extent that we can predict its water savings. So that component of water savings associated with AMI in Carrie's presentation is referred to AMI leak letters. So that's where we understand their leaks. We can contact customers. With AMI, that sort of happens automatically if they're signed up to receive those notifications. So that component we've already packaged as part of the strategic water supply assessment. The other piece of AMI that's much harder for us to quantify is the behavioral component. Is sitting there knowing, gosh, why am I using so much water? What did I do last week that I need to change or I want to change? And people's behaviors change, their patterns change. That's not something that we can put a hard and fast number on, which is what we were trying to do in the strategic water supply. It is, though, when we look at our water conservation master plan, right, we may be able to take sort of a little bit more of a swing and an estimate there. There is a study from AWWA that indicates somewhere between 6% and 12% water savings from AMI. So we can bring some of that information to the board as well.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Might indicate that a great deal of that savings is due to the replacement of the meters, that the meters are set at above 100% accuracy. So that was the basis of what I understand is the initial savings in AMI is all to do with the replacement of the meter. So
Right.
kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and I think we have some strategies around that based on age of meters and.
But I think there's another part that we may not be looking at here, and just to give it some thought, it seems to me that the folks who are really interested in that issue would have bought the flumes when they're subsidized. So we may already know the width of the band on that area. Doesn't mean more people can't be brought into it.
Right.
But the ones who are really interested likely already did it because they could always get the flume at a very reduced price. So just give that some thought that, there's a couple thousand flumes.
Yeah.
The other, Paul, I thought savings came from extrapolating our pilot and the leaks that we find, what that would translate to system-wide. And
Yeah.
I don't recall, you may recall more precisely, it was a surprising high number of AMI customers that have had one or more leaks, somewhere around 20 or 25%.
I don't remember the
Yeah,
percentage.
it was
Ben, yeah.
surprisingly high. We can bring that, but I think that's also, this real water savings.
Yeah, definitely. That was the leaks that I was
So
talking
you're
about.
saying that when you put AMI, it causes a leak.
But maybe building on this, we've the last Madaus presentation, and I believe that was towards the end of last year, they made a compelling argument for bringing AMI in to improve our conservation efficacy. We've heard from, when Tony Martin was here during our retreat, Tony Martin from North Bay Water, he was a strong advocate for AMI. And I think we've, received information from various sources on how important it is to adopt the technology. But honestly, Paul, I don't feel like we've had a super good analysis from somebody that can really speak to all of the attributes of AMI, all the benefits. Is there any opportunity to bring in somebody with, say, who's been implementing now for a long time, say SFPUC? Is there any ability to meet with them just to learn from their experiences and maybe what they've been able to do with the data that extends even beyond household leak detection to better management of their systems?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, you know, as water agencies, we do collaborate frequently with each other, and we could certainly find someone who is willing to come and talk to us, maybe even at a committee meeting or something like that.
I mean, that type of seminar, I think, would be really interesting. I'm guessing that the AMI vendors would be more than happy to do that. I'm not sure if that's the route we want to take, but you know, something along those lines, I think would be really beneficial for us.
We could probably get the vendors here tonight.
But I think, as Ben said, there is a presentation coming, and certainly on the timing, and maybe there'll be some other components.
I think Medallis's quick study showed that we should be able to save 10,000 acre feet of water by 2045 at a cost of $287 per acre foot. So that might be right or wrong, but there's some clear data behind that. That's a lot better than a lot of the 10x investments that we're thinking about, like desalination or recycling. There's other areas in conservation that I hope are in there. I mean, we talk about turf replacement in the Medallis study that was also well below desalination and recycling and other ideas. There's turf conversion that was well below it. Pool covers was about $1,000 an acre foot, you know, a fraction of the cost of some of these other water supply options. So I know you were thinking, Ranjiv, multiple times you said that you wanted to make sure we can prove that conservation will pay for itself. I think a lot of these ideas, Medallis' study said, absolutely, we can prove that we can save, and conservation is probably the best way for us to increase our water supply. Some of the ideas weren't great, like some of the rain barrels was not a great idea, and laundry to landscape was expensive. But I think it's important for us to start thinking about those ideas. If you can afford it, great. They may not be the best investments for this agency, but I'm hoping that these kinds of water demand reduction ideas will be tops of our mind as we go forward. And I know we're putting some energy into it. Thank you.
Okay, so what everybody's still smiling. This is so good. Early actions, I'll run through these quickly because I know you guys have a fair amount to do this evening. So in terms of Suluhuli electrification, the team has met with PG&E last week, and they've asked us to initiate a large load study for that area. They're also going to come back to us, and they're going to take some of our demand and you know, how we want to use that pump station, and talk to us about potential alternate energy solutions as well. Meaning that Suluhuli, so microgrid type approaches, green energy solutions out there. So, you know, Suluhuli electrification is it's not a slam dunk. It's not a foregone conclusion. This is a very remote location. You've been out there. It's farm country. And so we want to make sure we cast a wide net when we're looking at this opportunity here.
Of course, we could look at a large scale solar out there, huh?
It was talked about. Yep. I think that's an interesting one. We should come back to that at some point.
Paul, can you just talk about how this 6 million relates to the 7.1 that's later in the presentation?
Yeah, this is just a legacy number. I'm sorry, it's my mistake. The funding should be 7.1 for this project. Yeah.
And this is underground, right?
Oh, I think it's overhead, actually. Reconductoring the existing conductors is the initial thought.
I think we should give serious thought to that.
Okay.
And just as a matter, I think, to help the public who may be tuning in and not and remembering past presentations, if we can just, when we have a project bullet like this, we can explain like what is electrification of Suluhuli and why is that generating water? And just I know we don't have to go into paragraphs, but just a bullet point that might keep the public up to speed on why we're even considering this.
It's a great point. I'll just say that Suluhuli is one of our remote pump stations. It's not currently connected to the electric grid, and when we want to use it, we need to roll large diesel generators out there. And so it's a challenge for us to use it. If we are able to use it more frequently and to a greater range, we feel we can collect additional water in that reservoir. So we increase our yield and we achieve electrification of an important asset for the district. So there is, again, to the points earlier this evening about funding strategies for different projects, I've tried to include a note, just kind of a bullet at the bottom of each page. Our funding strategy for this is we want to think about tapping our WRDA award, just a small tap, $2 million, kind of puts our fingerprints on that money. And then, you know, using our CIP to fund the rest. As you all know, this is included in the sort of expenditures that were discussed in the rate plan.
The WRDA is the 28 million?
Yeah. And then there is potential, right? PG&E have this on bill 0% financing up to $4 million as well. It might be interesting to look at some point.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that undergrounding. I mean, at least the CEO of PG&E, she said that they're only going underground henceforth. So I find that kind of interesting. They'd be looking at an overhead for us instead of going underground.
That's just my very initial understanding. Yeah.
No, I'm sure you're right.
concept-wise,
though.
Yeah. On Phoenix to Bontempi, another early action. This is moving water from Phoenix Lake into Bontempi Lake. And again, if we can connect this to our system and use it, we'll be able to take advantage of a little bit of water in Phoenix there. This is an opportunity for a collaborative, project with the county. They may be interested in partnering with us on a sort of a flood control basis, and maybe there's a cost share there. The team met last week with Molly's assistance. We were talking with Tom Berliner just about water rights using Phoenix Lake water into Bontempi. And just from our conversations so far, it seems that that's a thumbs up. We should be clear to do that. And that's not terribly surprising. Phoenix is one of our oldest water rights. It's a pre-1914 water right. Of course,
I think we make a lot of sense to bring Tom in to talk to the board or Doc or one of these about that whole issue of water rights. Berliner is an absolutely brilliant individual who has as much knowledge as anyone I know in the water rights business. So I think that would be a really good thing to kind of show the board what already exists in part, the kind of what's behind the curtain that you can't see.
So I'm sorry, Director Russell, you're not speaking specifically to this project? You mean generally on with respect to? Okay.
Yeah.
So we have, of course, started thinking about CEQA implications for this project as we have to, and scoping the work for our consultant in that area. And engineering have already done some pre-thinking around this and have some good ideas on how this project might move forward. Again, funding strategy will explore flood control funding from the county, combined with some of the WRDA and potentially our CIP funds as well. As we think about, and this was the item we talked about a little bit earlier, developing a strategy for maximizing supplemental supply from Sonoma. Our current front-loading strategy is, July 1st, we're going to start through November, taking kind of what our maximum available water from Sonoma is. We don't know what the winter is going to be like. We want to preserve our reservoirs. So we're just going to take as much as we can. And then, in a really good year, we might get pretty close to 5,000 by December if we were just not constrained at all and we had the right demand patterns and things like that. So then we need to make some assessment. How is the rainy season? What do the other forecasts say, around, can we have forecasts improved to the extent that we can trust a seasonal forecast to actually make expenditure plans? What's our risk tolerance in this scenario? But we need to, we'd like to really, through this optimization piece for the early action project that we've got here, we'd like to really identify what reservoir level, so that any two of us that were to look at this strategy could make the same decision, right? We have a nice concrete strategy to consider and come up with a decision. Do we buy more water from Sonoma or continue purchasing water at a certain rate from Sonoma? Right now, there really isn't a dedicated, a target reservoir level for us to say. Is it when we stop spilling? Is it when we're below average? So there's some, I think, rich area for discussion around this.
What Paul's talking about here is something you haven't experienced yet, which is it's a little bit of tummy rubbing. So you have to, what he's after is a more definitive prescribed method for deciding when to boost that water flow, because you take the risk of putting in the system and spilling it out up in the reservoir.
Right.
So this is a very complex issue.
Yeah.
But I want to throw out one more thing to think about here. Maybe it's time to talk to Sonoma. I'm concerned about what you said earlier, that we're going to start taking water even if we're spilling. It bothers me from an environmental standpoint. I understand the contractual side of it. We paid for it, might as well take it. But maybe we can work a deal out to store the water in Sonoma instead of here. leave it in Sonoma
Hmm.
and say we have a credit due. I don't know. Is it calendar year for the
Fiscal,
5,300 fiscal year?
fiscal year, yeah.
So we have till July 1st.
Yeah.
June 30th.
It's June 30th, yeah.
That's actually,
It's pretty
it,
creative.
it is a really interesting idea because I have seen that elsewhere. And, Los Vaqueros, for example, you can store water
Yeah.
there. There's calculations
Can and people
on-
do.
What's that?
They're doing it right now.
Right. There's calculations on, you can only store it for so long because evaporative losses, that
Sure.
sorts of thing, and they charge for storage. But it is a really interesting idea to wrap into this overall strategy.
Of course, what I started getting concerned about when you showed that Sonoma stuff is, this is Jared Huffman's thing with FIRO and all that, to change the way they did the evaluation. Previously, what would have happened is in January, they would have said, uh-oh, rain's coming. We got to dump water. And that's what they did. So Jared was successful in working with them to change the thinking. The problem is what happens if they start to flood? What happens if they get to maxing that reservoir? I mean, there's still a lot of room to go.
Yeah.
But that's where it gets tricky is, you hear people talk about, we're throwing the water away. It's going to the ocean. Well, that's all true. But from a civil engineering standpoint, health and safety is the first step. You want the reservoirs to work. The ones that work as flood control reservoirs need to protect from floods. And, you guys are all too young, but the Yuba Dam area, the Yuba River, was one of the most classic. That dam actually went into service before it was finished. It saved the valley from a flood like 40 years ago. And it has probably saved 25 floods since that time. So, it's like, it's a good tummy feel. We're saving the water, but you need that space too for the flood. So, but I think this one is worth kicking around, even if it's a credit that expires.
Mhm.
I mean, it's just a piece of paper. It is a contract, yes, but it's just a piece of paper. It's just people doing what they think is best at the time.
No, it is a good idea. We'll incorporate it. I think including in the variable is going to be timing, because for example, today, the water they're sending us is actually winter water. So they
Of
aren't
course.
pulling it out of the reservoir. They wouldn't want to give us credit for that. But when you get into the summer, it changes. That's from
course.
releases from the reservoir.
But maybe they need to back up a little bit too and look at theirs in a more global
Exactly.
picture.
Yeah.
Because I think they've always been, this is what I see when I talk to Sonoma Water. They focus on the short term, not the big picture, at least what I've observed.
Yeah.
I think this is a really great point. And I think, everything we just talked about, the scenarios we just talked about are these wet year scenarios. I wonder whether this same type of management flexibility we could apply in a more average year when we are, again, still, if we got an average year, we would spill. If there's an ability for us to hedge our bet by leaving it in Sonoma, and we would take some risks of it spilling there and other things, there's a whole management scheme there that I think would add a lot of flexibility to us, which would be really great to explore. So I encourage us to come back to that one.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Well, we think today, just in sort of interannual divisions of this water, if we can think about them over a span of 20 years, we can really start to understand how different strategies might play out, and one might be beneficial over another in terms of total spill over that year, over that period of time. So that's what this effort is. It's a modeling effort. It's probably on the order of $100,000. I hope to be bringing this back to the board in a month or so to award this. The funding strategy, it's not a line item in the budget, but it's a relatively light cost, so we should be able to squeeze it in. And then the stream release automation that we've talked about, this is again Kent Lake and Sulhuli releases, and we're using as the control point the USGS stream gauges. So we're going to capture that data. Our team has already met on this, and we're going to start project to capture the data from the stream release gauge, bring it back to SCADA, and we'll start drafting an algorithm to control the release valve to match what our requirements are.
That is great.
So that's step one. Step two will be looking at, do we need better measurement? Right? So that's how we're going to tighten this up and automate a process that's probably long overdue for automation.
How long is this, the stream section change per year? I mean, your gauges are based on.
Yeah.
Is
They
there a
go,
Control section on the.
no, they go out and monitor it quite frequently, and they
So,
make,
but the bottom changes.
right. And that's what they go out and then they shift adjust, they call it, their height,
How often?
maybe every couple months.
Oh, that's pretty frequent.
Yeah. Especially in the, wet weather periods.
That's the GS.
USGS, yeah.
This is a really interesting option that I was somewhat late to the process. And I would love to see us maybe have a presentation on this in a little bit more detail, just to, how this would work. Some maps, some estimation of how, show us where we would be recovering with greater forecasting and ability to more tightly control our releases, how we'd see that volume stored instead. I think that would be really helpful to have a chance to look at that in detail.
Yeah, that's definitely doable.
What percent of the stream flow are we?
Now, our minimum is a million.
Those releases. The ones you wanted to monitor, improve the electronic monitoring. What percent of that flow at the stream gauge are we from the reservoir?
Well, it depends on the time of year, obviously,
course.
but summertime, we're probably
100.
not quite, but maybe 80. Yeah. High
So there's a stream bed contribution.
Well, there's a fork upstream, right? San Geronimo Creek joins that section and then becomes Lagunitas.
Where I'm headed, Paul, is I wonder if it makes sense for us to more accurately monitor our discharge. That's something we can do
Right.
fairly sophisticated
Yeah.
without, looking at open channel flow.
Oh, we have a flow meter on there. Yeah.
And when
On
was the
our
last
releases.
calibrated?
I
I don't care.
I can't hear you.
My point.
Yeah.
My
You're
point
still
is,
smiling.
the problem we have in water districts in general is that water's kind of free. We have the same sickness that the consumer has, that it doesn't have much impact on you when you have excess. So you go, whatever, what's a little more water, run the water for 2 more minutes, what difference does it make? And, I think the value of the resource is changing, the mental value, not its actual value, but its mental value. And maybe we need to look more tightly at, really monitoring our stuff, because one would assume that the proportion of our discharge to that stream gauge is probably a calculatable number, at least an estimatable number.
Yeah. That's,
So if you know that number, you kind of know that number. There's probably a correlation that's almost 1-to-1, because you said 80% in the summer. What do you think we are in the winter?
well, it's all how the rain falls and
course,
the
but just,
runoff occurs. It's-
Average.
I wouldn't even be able to hazard a guess. Well, when it's raining today, it's 100%. We're all but, I mean, the natural flow is 100%. We're almost zero, excuse me.
Because we back off.
Yeah.
I mean, it just depends on the water you type, and there's a lot of variability that goes into that, and
It's very
antecedent
difficult to-
conditions. Yeah.
Same amount of rain generates vastly different amounts of runoff. So anyway, I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer.
Okay. You're thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. This will be a fun one. And again,
Well, this is a great opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. And the funding strategy, again, this is not a line item in our budget. President Schmidt said late to the party, but it's relatively light in cost, so we should be able to squeeze this one in as well. In terms of our conservation, we're ramping up our incentive activities, hopefully in time for summer. It's still raining, of course, but you will start to see some more ads going out, outreach to our customers, and should be It should be a good time this summer. And I know there's often some confusion around our conservation, and Sonoma has some splashy stuff that occurs, but right, that's all done under the guise of the Sonoma Marin Partnership, which of course we're part of and we contribute to in terms of funding every year. So everything that they're doing, it's often Sonoma is the first title and Marin can sometimes be tucked down in the bottom, but we are part and parcel of those events that occur up there. So just draw your attention to that. We've talked about AMI this evening as well.
Well, they do have some differences in
They do.
their rebates and policies, right?
They
We're
do.
not all the exact same.
Not exactly, no.
But I appreciate your focus on this, and we'll get into it in more detail.
And then so we've talked a little bit about scope of work for water loss and the importance of that. And again, the funding strategy I mentioned earlier, we have an earmark request into US EPA for $1 million in funds, should be around 2,200 new AMI meters for our disadvantaged communities.
Before you go on, Paul, I want to touch quickly on incentives for activities for summertime. I think that the community really needs a message from us that explains why conservation is still important when it's still raining out. And I think we all could probably quickly say the reason why, but I'll just say it for the benefit is that we don't know what the future holds, and that conservation that we implement this summer continues on for next summer and the summer after that, when it could very well be very dry, and it will be again. And so continuing to do conservation efforts still makes a big difference even in a wet year. And I think, I'm sure, Adrian, you're all over the messaging that we need to put together. But I think our community, obviously sometimes is like, well, the drought is over. And of course, I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, I'll just mention that Carrie Pollard and I have been working on starting to plan for our next round of conservation messaging going into spring and summer. So you'll be hearing more about that soon.
And Paul, maybe before we move away from the slide, you've had a couple of requests today for almost primers, learning about AMI effectiveness in other settings. Monty was asking about, a brief on how the stream flow monitoring improvements might be working. And I can remember from previous years some really good presentations on conservation measures across different water districts. Peter Meyer has come up before. I remember sitting on two of his presentations in May and August of 2021. If possible, maybe during a conservation and communication, water efficiency and communications committee meeting, if we could receive just maybe some refreshers on what we've heard from in the past, what other boards have learned about conservation programs in other districts and how we might benefit from those, or what we've taken from those already, that would be helpful.
Yeah, we can certainly look into that. Yeah.
Carrie Pollard's probably the most important thing we took from another water district, just putting things in perspective. Yeah, it's interesting. In the conservation side, I think we should consider having a woman who spoke about gray water. Her name is, it's like Ariel or something like this, kind of an interesting first name. She had an interesting perspective on the issue that you just asked about, which is, she said a woman complained about, a speaker complained about having to do conservation or transferring the water to a toilet or something like that. And her answer was, you should be proud to use as little water as you can. We need to change the think ethic, that instead of looking at it as a burden, look at it as a benefit, and that it's a good thing. You should want to do it just because it's a good thing. And I think it would be helpful if we could get around that issue in the way that our public is thinking about conservation. Because, if they see it as, you can think about anything, think about gasoline and cars. I had a hot rod, and, when gas cost 25 cents a gallon, And, so it was still expensive, even at 25 cents a gallon. It doesn't seem possible, but it is. But, things have changed. I mean, cars now get 25 miles to the gallon, 30 miles to the gallon, 40 miles to the gallon. And I think it's the same kind of thing, that people see a value to having a car that's more fuel efficient than a car that's less fuel efficient. It's the same kind of change in thinking. And if we can get that engineered, and I think this young woman, I thought she made a very cogent presentation, a little bit heavy on the gray water side, but, be that as it may. What I liked about her presentation was the ethics side of it. You should be proud to be part of the community doing this. I think that's the message. We can get that across to people.
I triple down on that. That is so important, that we look at water efficiency from a positive light and not from, we're forcing you to do something, we're changing your behavior. It should be looked at as a community effort to step up and do something together and feel good about it. I know in Israel, they don't have clean cars. They don't wash their car. In fact, if you have a clean car going down the street, they look down on you, right? Here, it's the opposite. I didn't wash my Prius for a while, and I could feel like, yeah, come on, you can afford to wash your Prius. It's like, I don't know, maybe I don't have to. Is it really better for the community? And there's so many different ways that we can turn this around to work together. And that positive message probably would be the best return on investment that you're looking for, Ranji, right? That message about how we can think about unifying ourselves is probably the most important water supply piece of our roadmap.
Sorry for that.
No, it's great points. I think, yeah, dovetails nicely. Okay, so I'm going to move on. We've talked also some discussion this evening about the Petaluma brackish desalination. And to President Schmidt's earlier request, this is really just a concept that came out of the roadmap. We haven't spent a lot of time analyzing this. There's not a lot of real data, and we need to get that data so that we can present information to you so that you can make an informed decision one way or another. And to appreciate the comments about getting information in earlier so that you have time to consider it. And we'll do our best to meet that.
I think Mimi's comment was very apropos too. We should try to get these slides done at the 72-hour mark. I know the problem and I know the issue. It's hard. It's last minute changes and things. The worst we see it is actually in the economic side. Those things seem to be changing up until the meeting. But much of this could be done sooner and posted. And I think that would be helpful for everybody. We get them, Terry's nice enough to send them to us as soon as she can get them to us. And so we may get, 24 hours or 48 hours or something like that, but that's the soonest I've ever seen them, as I recall. So I think that would be a really good goal to say, let's try to get this stuff capsulated. Even if it changes, it's okay. If it changes, it changes. Point out the changes or don't point out the changes. Repost and say, here's the old one, here's the new one, or whatever. But I think that would be a really good thing to help that transparency and information.
Understood.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. There's no additional work to shift the schedule, right?
No, of course not.
No, I mean, that's just the way I think for staff to think about it.
Yeah.
It's no more work. In fact, doing it late may be the more work than planning it out. And I think we can improve, certainly.
Well,
our
Ben,
practice.
work would grind to a halt if we didn't have deadlines. So,
Right.
it's just human nature. I mean, you do it when you have to do it. That's how everybody is. Not everybody, but most people.
I'd go for 48 hours. I'd go for not the day before, but
Well, I think we should, I
Yeah.
think we do the 72 because that's when the agenda is posted. I don't see any reason we can't have them, especially if you don't try to attach it. I'm not proposing that, not to attach to this, to the agenda, to the hard copy. Because I don't know, how many copies do we send out of these? 100? Not anymore? Oh, is it, but there's 100 emails of this, right? people like MCL will get it. Yeah. Did it mean notification meaning it's available? Yes. Okay. Because these used to go out in hard copy for a long
There,
time.
we have a text and email notification system that people can subscribe to on our website.
So I think, Adrian, you were saying 48 hours is not going to work because it's Sunday. So what should we, how should we
The
think
agenda,
about?
yeah, for
Yeah,
How should we
I-
think about how to do this then?
I think striving and then, specific exceptions, but move to as a rule, striving to post the PowerPoints when we post the packets makes sense. And I do appreciate the recognition that it's not a Terry. She fires them off as soon as she gets them. I think the board knows.
No,
that.
it's not Terry. No.
We
no,
know
she-
it's your
she does
fault,
her
Ben.
job. Absolutely.
No, thank you. This is, I know we're getting a little afield, but this is an important issue and I think this is also people are not working on it over the weekends and things like that. Other than board members and the public reading these things over the weekend, but
Lots of staff are working weekends too. Yeah, no, it's good comments. I mean, other than the obvious, this is a desalination project, which is not necessarily liked by everybody, but it's also an opportunity for us to really collaborate with both Petaluma and North Marin. We will be bringing this to the TAC ad hoc committee, so we can talk to our peers about this project. And projects like this just build relationships for us, even if they don't go anywhere. So, this project will be a good one for us to look into, whether we end up pursuing it or not. I just, already links with Petaluma, North Marin, and interest from others as well already on this project.
Yeah, I'm not, my abstention from the vote did not lean into the merit of wanting to understand this more.
Yeah, gotcha.
And Paul, just in addition to building those relationships, even if it does not go forward, if it doesn't go forward, it takes it off the table. And that's an important step for us.
Yeah, right. So I won't go through the details of, but you can see here what a feasibility study might involve, and Ben had run through that somewhat as well. Again, the funding strategy we talked about as well earlier this evening. In terms of our Marin Sonoma option, this is the conveyance of water, basically winter water to storage. And there are a couple options really still to think about and weigh in this one. And that's that, dedicated conveyance to storage from Cotati versus sort of expanding existing infrastructure and maybe adding a little bit to get it into storage at some point. We do have a lot of work to do here. What I just described is not a trivial exercise for us to come up with the criteria and the evaluation and to have the discussions with the board and the public to understand why one option is better than another, and the relative benefits of those options. And then, of course, you get into some of the nitty gritty on design. How big is the pump station? Do we need? What size of the pipelines that we're going to need? What are the alternate alignments for this type of work, right? When we think about CEQA, which is down the line, we have to have done a really careful analysis of alternate alignments. And the alignments that we do look at, we want to know, are there utilities congested in the streets? And, if this is a long pipeline that we're building, there may be multiple jurisdictions that we have to go to and get information on where various utilities are along the alignment. There needs to be hydraulic analysis, pump station layout. So there's just a lot of work to get to the point where we're ready to implement a project like this. It's not a trivial undertaking. So in parallel with that sort of engineering and planning work that we need to do, we have relationships with Sonoma to think about, and the other contractors who may be concerned about, Marin positioning themselves to take more water from Sonoma.
Okay.
Right. So there's, and that's not an easy task to really clearly communicate what our intentions are here.
But hopefully you're going to say what our intentions are. Our intentions are not to take their water, right? Our intentions are to help build a regional approach to water supply and storage, and to help invest in Sonoma and the region so that other folks can also get access to the supply. So I know you're saying how they the negative perception that they might have. There's a lot of positive. What I haven't seen is that 111 to 150 million before. Is that, have you shown that to us before? That's a new range that I don't feel like has been presented before.
The range that I think we looked at was the median range of that number in the 120 range. So this is just bracketing it based on the two different options.
Thanks.
Do you think it makes sense to consider a pipeline from Sulahuli to North Marin, Stafford Lake? In this,
This would be, that would exactly be one of the.
it's already in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So one is this dedicated approach to big pipeline pump station from Katati tanks to Sulahuli. The other is existing infrastructure, bringing it down the North Marin Aqueduct. Right. There's already a line to Stafford from that aqueduct. So initially we.
Oh, you're going to take it through that line.
Well,
I see.
initially, right? So you could phase that. So one project's feasible, the other's a big bite at the apple. We'll get into all of this a little
Yeah,
bit later.
it's a
down
little
the road.
tricky though, because you're taking treated water,
Yeah.
servable water, putting it in open reservoir, requiring retreatment or treatment in this case. But I think I'm just thinking about the logistics of North Marin's water usage versus our water usage. And one way of that whole winter water or summer water thing would be if we can get them offline using Stafford. It gets kind of interesting there on, then their capacity transfers to us. It gets kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
thought process.
with the board's approval of the Castania pump station, those summertime capacity issues are greatly reduced right now.
Yeah.
But anyway, those are all sorts of things that we need to be thinking about as we look at this option. So I've made an effort to identify a sort of a schedule here where we're putting together the scope of work. So this scope of work is in draft already. It's being looked at by the consultant that's just come on today. And so this is our target that we're hoping to get into.
This is Woodard too, or somebody else?
Woodard will be reviewing this scope. We don't know yet who the group that will be asking.
Come on the scope.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're just helping us with the scope.
You're talking about Woodard coming on board to do the scope. for
Yeah,
this.
right, exactly.
And so, Paul, you'd come back in August with a scope of work and a request for the board to fund.
Yeah, so we would be awarding sometime in June. So we may have an update for you in August, but we won't be anywhere near through completion of the pre-design work at that point.
Okay. With this item and with the next one, I have an ongoing question, I think, about the conveyance to supplemental water storage really makes some of these connections, I think, would work if we did not increase our existing storage, I'm assuming. And the degree to which I don't know, but then that as the next item is about how we could expand storage and thereby increase even more the amount of water, that new water for the district. A question I keep having is about the water rights and about the issue of raising any of our existing reservoirs and how feasible that is. I'm not speculating whether it's easy or hard, but I think I feel confident in saying that it could be an Achilles heel of a storage project, and I'm concerned about the degree to which it also might affect our analysis of new pipeline connections. If we're going to be investing money in feasibility studies, and yet there's an item out there which could take certain surface storage off the equation, if, for example, I just worry that we will be spending money when we've got some outstanding items that we could maybe more quickly figure out whether it's a real significant issue or one that we likely can get over. So I don't know if you've given any thought to the phasing of that, but that's an issue that I'd like to understand how we're addressing that in concurrence so that we don't invest in studies that ultimately prove unnecessary or infeasible for other reasons.
Yeah, just getting right to the easy question. So why don't we move to the next slide unless there's any questions on this one, because I think that's really a local storage question in the context of everything else that we're trying to do, which is again, no small task. So yes, to your point, President Schmidt, the local storage, we're going to have to do some level of studies because we know really what kinds of questions we're going to be asked about this project. So we don't want to go, asking questions about water rights for which we don't already kind of have an inkling of the answer. So we do need sort of homework that we need to do. And that homework, I'm sure you're probably more aware than I am, will relate to, right, what's the impact to stream flow, right, in below these reservoirs if we were to increase the dams. And so ESA, in support of the temporary urgency change petition that we looked at, 21, I guess that was now, has a model for that stream flow, and they'll be able to adapt that model. But to go a little bit further, I think that they've indicated that it would be very helpful, for example, if they could make some actual physical measurements in the streams to kind of calibrate, validate the models, so that when we're having some discussions, we can have confidence in what the stream flow is going to be. And then there's an interpretation of that stream flow and its impacts to the various stages, particularly of fisheries, right, in terms of the stages of life of the coho and just general aquatic species impacts in the streams. So we kind of know and expect those, and we're stewards of the environment, as you know, and have been for a very long time, and we're not going to jeopardize that status. So it's a very careful, I think, thoughtful approach to the environmental aspects. So we do need to do our homework so we can answer those questions that you're rightfully asking.
Thank you. And that does make sense. I think that the concern I've had all along with this is that our cost for yield assumed that we wouldn't have any additional release requirements. And that's just a fundamental assumption, which, if is true, then our cost per yields are accurate. If we are required to release more water, particularly if our summer releases were to go up for whatever reason, which I think it's worth, making it clear to the public that that's a possible outcome when you reopen your water rights, that conditions that were previously set upon a water right could be changed in different directions. So I think that there's a lot of uncertainty there, and I just want to, I understand the need for us to understand better the potential project and the potential change to releases, but I'm also not wanting to have us go too far down that road where we're spending a lot of money or time on something when we could check in with the water board at its earliest point. And just even maybe it's getting a gut check with them about this process and engaging them. I think it would be really good to understand what conversations have been had with them. They'll obviously be aware that we're looking at these options, and they will be already cognizant of the need for us to come to them and have a conversation. So probably can't be too early. And so it'd be very interested to hear how that goes.
Two comments on that. You're exactly right. I'm not sure about talking to the cops. That's a kind of a different issue. That takes a little more planning, I think, than just, hey, we're thinking about this. But that was my comment earlier about bringing in Tom Berliner. It was to show you what tools we already have, because Tom is a very articulate individual, and he has his thumb on this issue of what they will do, likely what they won't do. So that's a really important one. But I also mentioned, exactly what you said, Monty. 9517 is the culmination of a lawsuit, basically, between us and the state board. And what the state board had issued was they wanted us to release 1/2, 50% of the water. We negotiated to 25%. Now, think about that in terms of our water use issues. If we had to release half of the water, and I'll tell just a little short story. I was out at the Red Barn out in wherever that is, out almost to the ocean there, Olima. And an individual walked up to me and said, you're just like all the rest. I said, sorry, I don't even know who you are. He knew who I was. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, you came in, you threw a dam across the river and you took the water. Well, that is kind of what we did. And this is a complicated issue. That's why I hear that, like, Mr. Smith's comments that the water from Folsom is running to the ocean. That's true. But of course, that's also the conveyance where the salmon go the opposite direction through that water. So it's not so simple just to say, well, we're throwing 15,000 CFS away. Well, sort of, but we're also building the water conduit that the fish use to swim. And so it's important. Your point is right on. I think my judgment is that there's a better than 50% chance that it'll get worse, not better, if we open up 9517. And I think the more we do to supplement water supply, we're kind of building their case, right? They'll say, you don't need this water, let it go. So anyway, I think there's a high risk on 9517. It's not insoluble, but it needs very careful planning.
Yeah, no doubt. So good conversation. So this slide is really just talking about, again, is the complexity associated with the project and some of the elements of the work that we need to put together, again, to bring back so that we can make decisions. And the schedule shown here, similar to the other one, has been mentioned earlier. A lot of this stuff, it's happening in parallel. And if you recall, during the retreat, we talked about resourcing this work with combining the engineering group and water resources so that we have internal staff, and then bringing consultants on to help us. So that's the sort of general plan for resourcing the work. In terms of the funding strategy for this, we do have a grant application into DWR already for $5 million to offset the cost of pre-design work. There's a potential for another USBR Water Smart grant, which is due this Friday. So hopefully Lucy will be working on that while I'm enjoying a few days off. And then we, of course, have our roadmap and implementation budget. So those are sort of the strategies for funding on this.
And thinking again in a bigger scope, 20,000 acre feet in Sonoma is a drop in the bucket, huh? So if you put it someplace else other than here, one of my problems about Marin has always been the fact that even though we're a peninsula, we think like an island. The emotional part, people think of us as an island, that you need everything self-contained. Well, you don't, because, that was almost killed us with the hesitancy to cook into the aqueduct. And that, without that connection, I don't know what we would be doing right now. It would be a very different Marin without that connection. And we need to be careful not to get caught up in let's do it in our reservoirs, as opposed to, all you need is the water. Doesn't matter where it lives, as long as you can get it. So, there's ample storage in different places already, if we can just change the thinking of how it's allocated. Without, I'm not talking about, borrowing it, I'm talking about buying it. Making an investment in somebody else's storage, so we don't have to build it here.
Yeah.
Paul, just I know you're trying to move on, and I know we do have more tonight. I just would like to say, like, maybe following on with Larry's point, I would like to see us have, if it's having Tom Berliner or somebody else, an expert on water rights, come in and talk to the board before we move past the scope of work. Because I think before I would feel comfortable committing significant funds for the study, I'd like to understand this and the phasing of how we will address the conversation. And I'll leave that to you folks to figure out the right order to have that, so that it's informed and productive. But I think having some sense about this issue before we commit significant funds for study is going to be prudent.
Very good. Okay. And so this is an attempt to put together a preliminary schedule. So some items are asterisk. They're just not a line item budget that you may have seen in some of the rate requirement work that you've done recently. But this attempts to take a look at how we might think about the expenditure rates or the burn rates for these projects across the next 4 years or so. And I don't know if the board have any particular questions about this.
How does this relate to the budget conversations that we've already?
Yeah, so these expenditures would match the budget.
Yeah. And then where does the $3.1 million that we talked about in the meeting 2 weeks ago fit into this? Where's that breakdown?
So that breakdown is, so Sulhuli electrification has its own line item in the budget, along with Phoenix has its own line item in the budget.
That's part of the baseline, I guess.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And then the asterisk items here are not, they're not in any budget, right? They're not a line item in the budget. So the remaining items, so the conservation, AMI is its own line item as well, right? That was, I think, combined with SAP and AMI, I can't remember, is it 8 million or 10 million or so, of which this 2.5 in the fourth year was allocated to AMI. So AMI, Petaluma, so the 3.1 is the Petaluma Brackish, the Marin Sonoma, and the increased storage. And
sorry, where is that?
So on the bottom 3 lines of the table, Petaluma, Brackish Desal, Marin Sonoma, and increased storage.
Those totals, the 1.75, 4.5, and 6 add up to the 3.1 times 4.
Or close to it, yeah.
Very close to it.
Recognizing that, right, estimates rarely come in lower as you move along on some of these projects.
Sneaky though, that 3.1 times 4, that's not doesn't jump out at you. Maybe there's a way to think about that in terms of showing it a little more clearly on the table in the future.
Yeah.
To say, this is 12.4 million or whatever it is.
So I thought we had a lot more items that we were going to research than those 3 with that 3.1 million. You had, the whole roadmap had more than that.
I think it's these 3.
Okay.
Because the others, as Paul noted, did have different line items, and there were some operating dollars on buying more water from Sonoma and the like.
And I think, Paul, just the item that's not included in there, that's on the water supply, is the looking at recycled water. And that was an identified item just to see what grant funding was for.
Exactly.
So I think most of them are in there when you add them all up.
The only one maybe that to me that stands out is the budget here for AMI is less than what I thought we had discussed in our actual budget, but I could be mistaken there.
We just haven't had time to review this, but
Yeah,
I'd love to see this and study it and map it back to
Yeah.
what we've seen before,
Just
because
hit me up.
the numbers just look different. Maybe it's all the same, it's just presented in a totally different way.
Yeah.
So I can't do the
Yeah,
math. on that.
this attempts to write a budget typically is smoothed, and accountants
Right.
love 3.1 times 4, but there's no way that we can expend 3.1 times 4.
But given the importance of this, maybe it makes sense to have either a clear focus in every board meeting to go through this for the next few months, or a separate committee, or put it in the operations committee or conservation. I think we need some extreme clarity on timing of expense in the coming 6 months, 12 months, so that we can kind of make sure that we understand if that 200 was one little piece that was just approved by the board, what are the other items that are coming up? When are they going to come up? What are the start milestones that we can look at, that we can make decisions around? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Are you President? Are you Monty? President Monty?
I am still today.
On how you want to do it, but I do think we should probably have some more conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, let's maybe let Paul finish this, but like, it would be great. I think that part of what we've talked about, and maybe it's still forthcoming, so I don't want to jump the gun here, but is that understanding how we're going to keep pace with tracking this information and how it's developed, and continue to have timely input. So I don't know if that's a process question that you want to get into now, or it's coming, or
just some insight maybe, and, you know, when we talk with the consulting teams on some of this big project, we talk with many of them. And they bring their ideas that are things that we may not have thought about. And so the scopes kind of get built. And once we know those scopes, then we can start to think about schedules and the details that you're really interested in. And I just don't have them for you at this time. This is a very preliminary look at what a burn rate might look like.
And totally appreciated. So thanks for doing this. I know it's a work in progress, and the entire presentation is absolutely moving in the right direction. So without a doubt, the staff, leadership team, board is motivated to move quickly, and it's happening in front of us, and we're just trying to get ahead of the process.
Yeah, so I think President Schmidt, let's get through this and talk about process and what the board would like to see when and what frequency and what venue. I think it would be a good discussion.
I have a pragmatic question. Is there a way to lose that window? I don't care about that, but I when it was like on the table, it was blocking out a chunk of the table. You know, like here it's fine. You know,
You mean the closed captioning thing?
no, the one you just minimized.
Oh,
But when it was on the table, it was taking out the whole
oh.
upper corner of the table. You know, so like, I mean, I presumed it was 28 was under there, but who knows, right? So maybe think about that a little bit. Does it affect the Zoom? No, it's just local. Great, great. Okay. Okay, no problem. Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. Just so quickly, then next steps, we're continuing, you know, hopefully the duck on the surface of the water, paddling as fast as we can underneath for these early action projects. And then, like I mentioned, developing the scopes of the work for the more complex projects, and then getting into Petaluma brackish discussions with our various colleagues at the different agencies. And then just, you know, as Ben mentioned, we are literally applying for every grant that comes up, even if it's last minute. And I think President Schmidt had a couple letters that we were asking him to sign, you know, last minute to a couple different senator offices. So we are continuing that, and let us know if that's something that we need to change. And that concludes the presentation.
I don't think that was the point of the comment that was made, Paul. It was more about planning than it was about the implementation of a grant submittal. Because like, I don't, Mr. Smith, I think Clayton Smith observed that it was the deadline that was already submitted on the 28th, right?
Yeah.
The one we were talking about.
Right.
So it was already done.
Right.
We're talking about it today on the 16th, 21st. But was done last month.
Yeah.
Yeah, on that, what I was thinking, and it's just an opportunity to run it by the board, is we do the GM monthly report. We could have a standing item in that tracks grants, where the grants we've applied for, what grants are we looking at, what's the schedule, and I'd like even what grants we aren't pursuing, because that's as
That's a great
important as
idea.
the ones we are. But just have that as a standing update, and
Yep.
we can all see it monthly.
And it's probably good for people like Matt and
Right.
the whole group, you know, just keeping score.
And for finance committee, we can prep in the finance committee upcoming approvals so that we can be ready for it.
Yep.
Okay, I am mindful of the time here and knowing we still have more to go. Are there any other board comments on this? Okay, can we open up to public comment?
Go ahead. We do have several speakers, Mr. Roger Roberts and a few online, number 1402.
My question is really rather brief. In the list of the various project opportunities that were given to the district by Jacobs Engineering, there are a lot of other things on there that we haven't discussed tonight, and maybe that's because they've been taken off the list. And it would be interesting to know what has actually been removed from future investigation or follow-up, whatever that is is in the works or not in the works. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Phil Sauter, please.
Thanks. As we look at water supply, I think it makes sense to start separating our potable water requirements from our non-potable water requirements. I'm not sure what the split is, but the more I play with the numbers, the more I start thinking that we may have something close to a 50-50 split between our need for potable water that's used inside the home for drinking, cooking, and bathing, and our need for non-potable water, which goes on into our landscaping and other outdoor uses. It really doesn't make much sense to go out and find new sources of high quality drinking water if we're going to end up spraying it on the ground. Conversely, I'm not sure we want to mix desal or treated brackish water with drinking water from our pristine watershed. It may be that right now our PFA-free watershed already provides us with a 3 or 4 year supply of the high quality potable water we need. And it may be that our search for new water supply could actually take us down a path of searching for new sources of non-potable water, either inside or outside our watershed. It could be that increasing our current 2% supply of non-potable water to something 10 or 20 times higher would make a lot of sense and let us conserve our potable water supply for its appropriate uses. Earlier this evening, I speculated that it may be 10,000 of our 60,000 customer hookups that need large amounts of non-potable water for outdoor use. And it may be that we can supply this non-potable water more effectively through different means than we supply high quality drinking water. We may even distribute it differently, especially if the number of customers is more like 1,000 than 10,000, or if they live close to one another and could share a purple pipe system. If our irrigation customers want to pay for a desal plant, they could have the greenest lawns outside of Ireland. And personally, I'd vote for desal for irrigation, but I wouldn't vote for it for drinking. So I'd like to suggest that we take a quick look at our top 1,000 customers and determine, 1, how much water they're using, and 2, when they're using it. If we see a clear spike in the summer months, we can make a pretty good guess how much water of their total water use is going for landscaping. I don't think we need a consultant to get this information. I'm sure that staff can collect 24 months worth of data for 1,000 customers. And if staff doesn't think it's worthwhile, I'd be happy to do it for free. All I'd need is 24 monthly data points for 1,000 customers, not by name, but by zip code. And I could figure out if this is worth pursuing or if it's just a dead end. Thank you.
Thank you. 1402, then Miss Mimi Willard, please.
James Holmes, Larkspur. Further to the board comments on what they characterize as the water rights issue, yes. The fact that the recent rains have temporarily given us more than enough water to cover the releases mandated by the draconian 1995 order that burdens the Marin Muni Water District and its customers should not blind the district to the long-term need to free ourselves from that order so that we can obtain the full measure of benefit from local storage options being considered. The time is very good because the Newsom administration has explicitly recognized that prior restrictions on water storage no longer work in today's situation, and the administration has specifically suspended some of the regulatory requirements that may underlie the draconian 1995 restraining order. The district should immediately explore applying the governor's actions and their logic to our case with a view toward modifying the 1995 order so that it will no longer be a significant limiting factor on our ability to expand local storage and retain rather than spill rainfall. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Mimi Willard, please.
Yes, good evening. I thought the board discussion regarding AMI was very interesting. My concern is that AMI is moving forward here independent of other decisions about water supply options, and there has been a sense that this board was going to evaluate them as a set. A few specific comments. One, regarding conservation, I think there's a really legitimate question as to how much further conservation opportunity we unearthed because of AMI, because our district already has a very low usage relative to other districts. Secondly, I would say inviting vendors to come to upcoming meetings, I think is not a good idea. Thirdly, I would like to see some information brought to the board about the maintenance costs and replacement cycle and other issues that relate to AMI, particularly since here in Marin, certainly at my house, we have a very wet, windy, harsh environment, which I think will have implications for how well this equipment holds up. And that brings us to a fourth point, which is if you're going to get input from other districts, they should be districts that are comparable. I would say certainly not Southern Nevada, which is a dry and hot. So perhaps East Bay Mud or other locations that are more similar to us. I think the most compelling opportunity here for AMI, at least from my point of view, is monitoring what usage is happening during a drought emergency. And of course, that takes us into the issue of whether people want to be monitored, though perhaps it is necessary. So I think at the end of the day, it may not be as compelling as it appears at first glance. And I think that there's a lot of work yet to be done as to what it will deliver and what it really costs us if you take into account the replacement cycle, the maintenance issues, and how much further conservation opportunity it would unearth. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Paul Duder, then Clayton Smith. Go ahead, Mr. Duder.
I have some questions about some of the projects, starting with the electrification of Suluhuli. I'm kind of curious about what the breakdown is for the $6 million cost assessment. And in general, I'm kind of wondering why we don't get breakdowns from, all of these cost assessments. It seems to me that in the presentation, there was initial request for $75,000. You can buy a lot of solar panels for $75,000. Of course, I don't know if that would cover it because the power requirements, I can't find them anywhere for what we need in order to run those pumps. So at any rate, if we could have information about how much power is needed, I'm sure that people could come up with an estimate of, what the cost would be for solar panels. If you just think about how many solar panels you can get for $1 million, that's a lot. So it seems to me the $6 million cost is wildly inflated. The second question I have is, according to the Jacobs report, the inflow to Suluhuli Dam on average is 18,000 acre feet per year, 18,000. It's basically twice the size of that reservoir. And yet the electrification project only is going to yield us 420 acre feet a year. I don't understand why we can only get 420 acre feet when on average, the inflow to Suluhuli is 18,000 acre feet. Anyhow, maybe that can be explained somewhere, but somehow that electrification project doesn't seem like it's yielding what it ought to yield. Similarly, when we talk about raising the storage for that dam, the yields are much, much higher. And so I don't understand how the yield from electrification squares with the estimates of the yield from increasing the size of that reservoir, because all that water has to be pumped unless somehow increasing the size of the reservoir includes some further electrification or larger pumps or something else that would explain why the yield from that project would be so much higher. So I have also some similar, I'm running out of time, I have similar questions about Phoenix Lake. According to the Jacobs report, the average inflow to Phoenix Lake is 3,665 acre feet every year. And yet the yield from the pipeline project is only 260. That doesn't sound right. Anyhow, that's it. I'm out of time. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Clayton Smith.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I had a power outage here. So I kind of got lost from your discussion. And so I'd like to first know which item are you on right now exactly? Which agenda item?
10.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Um, I would like, this conversation about AMI. I think that people are becoming people are becoming, at least that I know, increasingly concerned about all the monitoring that's going on. And I think in combination with what I was talking about earlier, the confidence in government now is kind of going down, down, down. And the whole smart agenda of surveillance, monitoring, assessing, recording, tracking, which is what SMART really is about, is something of great concern for a lot of us. So I think that's something that would be well worth reevaluating. And what benefit it provides, I don't know. Doesn't seem like I don't think the smart meter that I have in my electrical box out here has helped change my consumption of electricity. It perhaps has had a negative effect on my health. But anyway, it's something I think is worth tabling and it's certainly worth having a community discussion about before we start investing a ton of money in that. And I think would be very important for people to have some comparisons of what money spent in that direction versus elevating the dams we have might bring. Anyways, thanks.
Thank you, sir. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thank you, Terry. All right, that moves us on to the next agenda item, the post-retreat follow-up. Item number 11.
Okay, this is my item. The idea of bringing this back, as we said we would at the retreat, is to refresh us all on these goals and keeping them alive, of course, and also that we had just reviewed them at the retreat. This is a public meeting with greater participation to allow the public to see all the great ambitious work in front of us as well. So let's get into this, a little purpose of the goals and really focus on the goal areas and talk about the next steps, specifically in regards to how we're going to bring these to the board and report out on the milestones and the dates and successes or not. So the purpose, of course, develop alignment throughout district on priorities this coming year, recognizing this comes across as a lot of work, and it is, but it's really just a small fraction of the work of the district when we recognize the routine work, the day-to-day work of the district is not captured in these annual goals. And I think the board knows that, but it is important for the public to appreciate that. And these items will be used to populate agendas at committee meetings. They do stretch the district a bit. I think that's a good thing, but recognizing that really it's a spirit of continuous improvement in many areas of the organization.
Sorry.
So with that, we'll and I'll go fairly quick, and as there's questions, we can take them as they come up. What was that?
That's your new company car?
Yeah. Actually, I forgot. I was going to learn from Paul and take my classes, so everyone's smiling through this. But so the watershed, we have the BIFUP, a number of these, I think all of them, we may have gotten a good update at the most recent watershed committee, but the addendum for the EIR and pursue grants, Lagunitas Creek, this great work we've been doing for years and years, continuing to build upon it. And it's largely been and continues to be benefiting from grant funding. Azalea Hills, this is really a remarkable project, and I think kind of lays out a path for other opportunities in the watershed to look for win-wins where this project increases the access of multiple different users at the same time benefits the habitat, the rare habitat, and closing down social trails. It's really a project that all users and stakeholders seem to really be supportive of. So it's exciting. And again, we've benefited from grant funding. And of course, the rec plan, we've been talking about that, and that's on the schedule that you're fairly aware of. Human resources, a lot of work going on there. We talked about transitioning to a new recruitment platform, and along with that is thinking about reaching out in more targeted efforts to different community groups, thinking about local hires and similar. We've talked about a DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion initiative that's going to be kicking off with a work group to help frame and get buy-in in terms of where we're going. And then it would move to training all staff, online performance management system, as you know, with a focus on getting 360s integrated in a systematic and sustainable way for the organization. A number of employee engagement initiatives, including district-wide training program, the launch of another employee engagement survey, as well as developing kind of internal best practices in terms of how we communicate and engage with our staff. And as you know, kind of the collective bargaining agreement is another priority there. Communications, website improvements, completed a lot of work, went into that. Excited for the agenda management system that's really going to benefit all of us, but mostly I think our customers in terms of accessing information they're looking for. Outreach, of course, for key district efforts, and the list, as Adrian knows, goes well beyond these three issues, but those are kind of the priorities. But there's so much that goes into it and the different collateral that the comms team is working on. Finance, of course, there's the budget and rate setting process. We're fairly up to speed. A real opportunity on connection fees update that will not just reflect the current kind of cost of buying into the system, so to speak, but also opportunities to consider streamlining the process, and we'll get more into that, but also considering, is there an opportunity to think about the water that new development puts on the system, the water demand, and potentially integrate that cost in some way into connection fees. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities there. And then importantly, updating financial policies.
Maybe the term connection fee can be changed to think about an offset. You know, sort of like the George Lucas situation for
Right.
Grady Ranch,
Right.
that you aren't just buying capacity, but you're keeping the net zero, and you pay for that cost of doing that, or contribute to that cost anyway.
Right. Absolutely. Water resource.
Sorry, Larry, I didn't, the offset piece of that, I didn't understand.
When George Lucas approached the district about, you know where Grady Ranch is? Lucas Valley. Okay. He has 5 ranches in a row, starting with Skywalker. And the 5th one is Grady Ranch, which was outside of our water district. So Lucas applied for getting water from us. It all got bogged down with the county of Marin. It never went forward. But to do that, Lucas volunteered to pay us, I think it was 1.8 million. It was either 1.2 or 1.8 million to expand our reclaimed water system to provide a net zero impact for the water. He needed 30 acre feet. It wasn't very much. And that would balance out that. So we have a net zero growth. So you just cap everything at the current demand, and you make up the difference with Phil Sauter's idea with using the reclaimed. And that was what was going to happen if the county had got their act together. and they hadn't moved to Presidio and all those other things that happened. But that's what I'm talking about is it's a change in thinking, because the old way or the normal way is you're buying capacity for your addition. Well, maybe you shouldn't have any addition, and you should net zero, and you should be purchasing, albeit more expensive than a connection fee. That the idea is, if you think that number, that's about 60,000, I think it was 1.8, 60,000 an acre foot for his water. So that's about 1.5 times our current connection fee. So maybe that's the kind of number we're talking about. I mean, if you want to build a house in Marin right now, it's about 200,000 or 150,000 in connection fees between sewer and water. So, it's hidden in the price of the house. But if you want to take a bare lot and start it, ours is like 47,000 an acre foot, something like that. And the sewage is similar. So, it's in that ballpark. And then there's others fees that come with it. But it's really a change in thinking to, instead of, like I say, paying your share is obviously fair. But maybe you need to pay more than that because you need to offset this. So you don't start this cycle of, if you understand our, I'll call it a license for lack of a better term, our demand on us, we are obligated as a water district to supply the water that's needed. We don't have the option of going, oh, no, we can't do that. I mean, there are ways of doing it, but it's the routine is we're obligated to supply the demand that is required. And that's kind of how you do this is you say, okay, it costs this much to give you that usage. So anyway, it's just the way that the mechanics of it works.
Water resources, we just got the update from Paul on the roadmap implementation and the conservation program. Of course, we've been talking about and Paul covered as well. And the water loss opportunity is, going to be an interesting project and initiative to really see if we can improve we have a good program, but I believe we'll find some opportunities in that as well. In engineering, we've talked about this long vision of capital investment, given where we are and thinking about a long-term, a 30-year and 10-year, and we'll be working on that this coming year. The IT strategic plan, developing that and bringing that to the board. The help desk pilot we've talked about, and we will be bringing to the board in May a status report of how things have gone and looking in options going forward. The SAP conversion we've talked about quite a bit, and again, that will be in part of the presentation on AMI that we're going to be bringing next month, of course, in terms of the integration of both of those and how we may think about it, and then the escalating payment costs and working to develop a strategy, how we can approach that. And as we talked about, we do think specifically on that item, there's opportunities to work with the board to engage at the right time with other elected officials as we develop this. And then from district-wide, of course, and we've talked about this a lot, a district-wide strategic plan that identifies a long-term approach to improve the district and strengthen the district through targeted investments, enhancing our practices, application of technology and innovation. And this, it just feels like it's going to be a very deep and rich discussion and process, and really, it's really going to be the opportunity. And, Director Smith has been, asking the wish list, and, behind that, staff does understand and appreciate what you're looking for. And the idea in the strategic plan is to really bring that to the board, area by area, collectively, and really drill down and then, prioritization and schedule and what you would do in a typical strategic plan. So next steps, refine the goals as needed. But really the key is update of specific initiatives at board committee meetings, which we'll be doing. And also what I'm planning to do is quarterly updates at board meetings, not something like this, but some sort of light but real scorecard on how are we doing in terms of what we set out to do, and maybe green, yellow, red kind of thing, but just an indication where we really meeting or exceeding what we set out, where we had challenges and other things. But just keep this to be a key part of who we are, and do this as an annual process. And of course, future years will dovetail off the strategic plan, which is best practice. So with that, if there's any questions or comments on this.
Board questions and comments?
Thank you. That was fantastic. And I'm really appreciative. I know that took a lot of work. It'd be great if you could forward it to us. I don't think we've seen that before. Is that right? So if you could forward that to us, that'd be great. And I'd love to just kind of study it a little bit. But putting the dates down there, I know is not easy for a team, right? And now, and even better that you're going to hold yourself accountable, and we all will, and we'll do our best to meet it. And sometimes it hits red and sometimes it hits yellow, and that's okay. But it is the idea of checking on ourselves and setting out plans is terrific. So I'm hugely supportive. The only thing I guess there's some things in there, but one thing I didn't see, the staff survey just didn't have a date on there, but
That's an
but,
oversight,
yeah,
because
it's a
there
little-
is a date.
Yeah.
There
But
was an oversight.
there's a lot of other things on there,
Well,
but yeah.
on that, I do
Yeah.
know there's interest, so it's just worth touching on. I believe it may be December, and I know there's a sense that's way far out. That date's driven by a couple things. One is, frankly, the workload and resources in HR, but as much, ideally, we wouldn't be surveying staff in the midst of contract negotiations, for example. Let's get past that.
I don't know, need to go into details and all of it, but just thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. And I'd love the idea of checking in quarterly. That's great.
Maybe Ben, but my thanks as well for a great outline. Just on the strategic plan idea, often when I've done this, or, in other settings, we first have this goal of what we want to transition towards, the most cost effective at something, or the best at something, or the biggest at something. It would be good to know what, and I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing discussion, what the goals that we would like to are that we want to establish for the district that we're then going to move towards through the strategic plan. It's interesting to think what the goals for a water district would be. Again, is it the most cost effective? Is it the most innovative? Some combination of those things. But I hope we have a chance to think
Leader
about
in the industry, all kinds of
what-
really good, kind of hard and then aspirational kind. What I'd suggest, if it works for you and the other board members, is we do plan to bring on someone who's experienced in strategic planning to work with the board and staff in developing it. That could be an initial step, using that expertise to develop where we're trying to go, what goals. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I might suggest that first would be adequate water supply as a goal, far more important than the rest of those things. I just want to say that there was a copy of that colored thing in one of our packets. It came to us. So
Yeah,
we'll this
send
in a graphic form. It had the yellow and red and different colors. There was a full page table.
These were provided at the retreat. So that was where, there was a handout and you were able to see it. I did share with the board the comments, because we captured all the comments and the responses, at least the initial cut at them. That's maybe what you saw that I sent out earlier today.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is something at least that we have. That's what my point was.
Any other board
Again,
comments?
speaks to the issue of same day receipt and response. It's tough.
I think we got that one for sure. Any other comments?
Well, we shall see.
Yeah, we'll definitely come back to it. So, so I would just say, you did, one of the things that you, in your list was that this was a chance, or that tonight at some point we would refine and confirm those goals. There's a lot in there. I don't think tonight's the night to try to do that necessarily, but I might invite that during the committees, that the items that are relative to the committees be affirmed there as a discussion place, just to firm those up, because they're really important. And I do appreciate the summary. And I think, again, the retreat was really, really remarkable in terms of all the things that we covered and the amount of information that was presented, and really well. And I think the goals that we are setting for ourselves I think they're ambitious, but I don't think they're unrealistic. And I think our job, obviously, in part as board members, is to help make sure the district achieves these. So thank you for putting that together, and I look forward to seeing them, at the different committee meetings. No other board comments, then we'll open to public comment.
There are none.
Okay, then that moves us to the next agenda item, which is future meeting and schedule agenda items.
Good evening, President Schmidt and directors. Just want to remind the board that there is no Finance and Administration Committee meeting this Thursday that's normally scheduled, or typically scheduled, the fourth Thursday of the month, but it has been moved to Tuesday, March 28th at 1:30 p.m. Again, that is Tuesday, March 28th at 1:30 p.m. Also, after that meeting, the following week, we'll have again our first meeting of the month, April 4th, the Board of Directors regular bi-monthly meeting. In terms of external meetings, I have here the North Bay Water Reuse Authority will have their board meeting Monday, March 27th via Zoom, and I believe that's 9:30 a.m. unless, okay, thank you. Also, we have on April 3rd, Monday, there's a special Sonoma Water Advisory Committee / Technical Advisory Committee meeting. I believe that's at their location at 9 a.m. I have here April 7th is the North Bay Watershed Association. I don't know where that location is, and that's at 9:30. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to be moving to a closed session, and we'll ask if there are any public comments on the only on items on the closed session.
Yes, there are. I do have here Aaron Burton, who would like to speak, as well as Clayton Smith, who would like to speak. So go ahead, Mr. Burton.
Hi, good evening. My name is Alan Booten. I know most of you. I'm the chief negotiator for SCIU, which is the staff union that represents most of the district staff here. I just wanted to say that I look forward to having a cooperative negotiation this year. This is the first time we're actually going into negotiations in over a decade, so we're looking forward to that. I also had a chance to speak with the chief negotiator for the water district, and I think it was a very positive discussion. That sets the tone as well. Someone who's actually been who's actually been a labor negotiator before, so I think that sets a positive tone. And all members have worked through pretty challenging last few years with of course the increasing impacts to climate change with smoky and hot summers, ongoing droughts, staffing shortages and challenges around workload. And so we look forward to working with the district to address those items. And we also want to make sure we keep the water district competitive in terms of employment, where we retain staff, and also that
that we keep work in-house at the district. So thank you so much for your time, and have a good evening.
Thank you. And Mr. Clayton Smith, please.
Yeah, this actually applies to your labor negotiations as well as these comments I made previously. It was brought to my attention during the last Citizens Oversight Committee of the Transportation Authority of Marin that they have been having difficulty finding new drivers, leading them to reduce or eliminate services. This confirms the assertions made by Wall Street analyst and hedge fund manager Edward Dowd in his book, Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Deaths in 2021 and 22, which pertain to the recent unexpected payouts of the life and disability insurance companies. The statistics from the Department of Labor and from VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, following the rollout of the experimental NRMA COVID injections. It is clear from Dowd's inquiry that the working age population has been gravely affected, not only in terms of excess deaths they suffered, but much more significantly from the rise in permanent disabilities, which were multiples of the excess deaths following the injections. Their number appears to be about an increase of 1.8 million workers who are now permanently disabled since the jabs came out. And more are likely to arise as the impact of the shots makes itself fully known and as more boosters are brought on the encouraged to be injected. This is going to negatively impact all labor-intensive activities going forward, leading to persistent widespread labor shortages in the years ahead. There are some takeaways from this, the first being the price of labor inputs in your budgeting proposals and the potential for delays in completions. Second is your need, and this is my purpose for saying this, your need to discourage either mandating or recommending the inoculation of your workforce with any of these experimental pharmaceutical products using the particular platform, the nanolipid particle technology used in these COVID shots. Third is to rehire any of the people you might have unjustly fired for not taking these shots during the so-called state of emergency. And I hope that the guy from SEIU is listening, because this is a major problem. 1.8 million workers permanently disabled and entirely attributable to these shots. And you've got to think about this when you're negotiating on behalf of these other human beings. Thank you.
Thank you. I do not have any further speakers.
Okay, with that, we will be convening to closed session. The Marin Municipal Water District Board adjourned from our closed session at 10:24 p.m. There are no reportable actions, and we are adjourning for the night. Thank you.
Thank you.